May 2017, Anchorage, Alaska. The official police report records the beginning of an investigation that will subsequently completely destroy all ideas about rationality. 27-year-old Dave Rogers, an extreme climber with an absolutely impeccable track record of ascents, sets out on an extremely difficult solo climb in the Mount Dickey Massif area. The disappearance of such a professional looks absolutely anomalous. Rogers always carefully calculated the risks, had the best equipment, and clearly marked the routes. This was a routine outing for an expert who knew the mountains like the back of his hand. According to the route registration protocol, Dave had a clear agreement with his girlfriend, Mary Hayes. As Mary later stated during the official inquiry, the boy had promised to make contact via satellite phone exactly 5 days after entering the rocky area. However, the deadline passed. The next 5 days were marked by complete, deafening silence on the air. It was only on the 10th day of silence, when all safety deadlines had expired, that Mary informed Dave's parents of the emergency. The case files preserved a recorded quote of her call to her relatives. "He didn't come back." This short phrase instantly switches on the mode of absolute psychological hell. Dave's mother, according to the testimony of emergency paramedics, experiences a sharp spasm in her throat. The woman physically loses the ability to swallow air. Her lungs are gripped by a convulsive spasm, pushing out only a dull, intermittent wheeze. Dave's father freezes in a sudden, silent numbness at the same moment. His gaze becomes completely glassy, focusing on one point on the wall. The man's fingers begin to beat a fine, uncontrolled tremor, and his pulse jumps to critical levels. The family instantly finds itself in a state of paralyzing horror from complete uncertainty. The next morning, a massive rescue mission unfolds. Gyrocopters have been combing the vast Ruth Glacier area for years, operating at the edge of technical capabilities. Operators methodically interrogate dozens of climbers at bases near the foot of the massif. According to the materials of the reports, each interrogation returns an identical answer. No extraneous signals or signs have been detected. The result of the search racing is absolute zero. No footprints in the snow, no signal from Dave's emergency locator beacon, no abandoned piece of high-tech gear. The snow and centuries-old ice of Alaska seemed to have dissolved the man, erasing any clues. The intrigue cuts like a razor. Where could a top-notch professional vanish without a trace on a well-traveled route with no avalanches or storms in the area those days? Why did an experienced climber leave no technical or biological trace behind? After 15 days of continuous searching, when human and fuel resources are completely exhausted, the operation is officially discontinued. The leadership of the rescue team signs the final report on the closure of the active phase of the mission. The loved ones of Dave Rogers plunge into chronic despair, gripped by the pincers of terrible uncertainty. The case is officially sent to the Archive of Unsolved Disappearances. The end of 2022. Official materials of the criminal case record a harsh, radical turn after 5 years of complete, deaf uncertainty. Professional mountaineer Mark Carroll, while storming a difficult vertical couloir near the Ruth Gorge mountain range, gets into the epicenter of a devastating storm. Hurricane-force winds and zero visibility force him to urgently break off the previously approved commercial route. Carroll frantically searches for natural shelter for salvation, breaking through the solid snow curtain, and at the last moment slips into the depths of a cave. Examining the dark enclosed space with a flashlight, he notices a greenish silhouette of a modern trekking sneaker, firmly embedded in the ice. Carroll begins to act as aggressively as possible. He frantically chips away at the ice with an ice axe, clearing the dense frozen mass. Under the transparent layer of the glacier, a frozen human body is revealed. The mountaineer is overcome with sudden numbness. His heart starts to wildly pound from the realization of the gruesome discovery. He instantly rips the satellite emergency communicator from his equipment, activates the panic button, and transmits precise geographic coordinates to the Alaska State Police Coordination Center. The investigative tactical team and rescuers quickly deploy an evacuation mission. They cut their way to the cave through the bad weather, carrying heavy hydraulic equipment for exhumation. Over several hours, rescuers cut out the frozen ice block with the body using chainsaws and specialized tools. Biological samples are transported under tight security to the forensic laboratory in Anchorage for emergency analysis. The DNA analysis results instantly break the 5-year silence. The body officially belongs to the missing Dave Rogers. Forensic experts record in the autopsy report that death occurred due to acute hypothermia approximately 5 years ago in 2017. A severe lifetime fracture of the bones with displacement was found on the left leg. The investigation builds a simple version. The climber broke his leg, completely lost mobility, crawled into the cave, and froze. This finding returns Dave's parents to the epicenter of a severe psychological nightmare. During the official notification, the father freezes under the weight of mute shock. His gaze becomes completely glassy, and his hands begin to beat a fine, uncontrolled tremor. The mother experiences a severe spasm in her throat, choking on a mute scream and unable to take a normal breath. However, the grief-stricken relatives feel a painful relief. The torment of complete uncertainty is finally over. Now they will be able to bury their son. At the official funeral ceremony, the deceased's ex-girlfriend, Mary Hayes, appeared. Investigators record in the case materials a significant fact. Over the past years, Mary tried to build a new life and is currently in a completely different relationship, which she openly started a month after the official termination of the first search operations in 2017. According to the testimony of the relatives present in the interrogation protocols, Mary looked genuinely heartbroken and deeply depressed. The girl cried next to Dave's mother, fully sharing the common pain from the terrible loss. Her body shook with heavy sobs, and her breathing became intermittent due to strong emotional pressure and suddenly returned memories of the past. No one makes any direct accusations or suspicions. Those present, relatives and close ones, note in the reports that her reaction was absolutely natural for a person experiencing emotional shock from the return of an icy ghost from the past. Everyone was convinced that Mary came exclusively to support the grieving parents of the climber. The official proceedings are being prepared for final closure in connection with the accident. The investigation is confident that a period has been put to this tragedy, once and for all. A month after the burial of the remains of the climber, a report on the finale of the 5-year search appears in the press. The publication is noticed by climber John Burke. The information from the article forces him to urgently appear at the Anchorage police station and make a statement that undermines the logic of the investigation. According to the interrogation protocol, Burke swore that exactly 2 months after Dave Rogers' disappearance in 2017, he personally weathered the storm in that cave near the Ruth George Fault. The witness clearly recorded that the cave was completely empty at that time. There was no body or equipment there. Given the geography, Dave Rogers could not have survived 2 months in the mountains without a camp and then crawled there after Burke left the cave. The state police are in no hurry to open a case for intentional homicide. The report states that detectives took Burke's statement with skepticism, assuming a mistake in the chronology due to the age of the events. Officials are pulling Burke's satellite trackers for 2017 to check the logs. Instead of taking drastic measures, the prosecutor returns the case for additional verification to audit the timeline. Detectives begin to re-examine every detail of the subject's property. Lead Detective Evans initiates an in-depth examination of the equipment in which the frozen climber was found. The investigative actions move to a closed forensic laboratory. Evans conducts an examination of the inner layers of the jacket, pants, protective membranes, and carabiner fasteners under powerful lenses. It is at this moment that the effect of the absolute impossible unfolds, completely crossing out the previous conclusions. On the internal seams of the thermal underwear, the detective finds factory laser thermal stamps, serial numbers, and manufacturer's codes. Laboratory analysis of the fiber structure confirms the complete absence of microstructural degradation of the material from prolonged exposure to ice pressure. Evans sends an official request directly to the technical manufacturer. A written response from the factory, which arrived at the department and was urgently stitched to the investigation materials, causes a state of dumb awkwardness among the operatives. The report clearly states that the entire specific line of extreme assault gear, including the series of salad-colored sneakers and the membrane jacket, was designed, manufactured, and released for sale on the global market only in the first half of 2022. That is, this year. This information triggers a severe psychophysiological collapse among the members of the investigative group. The detective's breath catches at the realization of the anomaly. Evans' gaze freezes under the weight of mute shock, and the heart rate jumps to critical limits. Official logic crumbles to dust. A forensic medical examination based on the state of biological tissues stubbornly insists that Dave Rogers has been dead for 5 years already, and his biomaterial has been in a state of deep, complete freezing since 2017. The clothing in which this frozen 5-year-old body was wrapped was manufactured and purchased only a few months ago, in the year 2022. The dead person could not physically get up from the ice after 5 years, go to the store, buy a brand new jacket, put it on, and then somehow get stuck in the same cave under the glacier again. In the face of this impossible chronological paradox, the state police finally rule out the accident version. It becomes apparent that someone external deliberately manipulated the body, held it in an unknown location, and only recently staged the discovery in the Alaskan mountains. The prosecution cancels the previous ruling of the subject's natural death. Based on irrefutable physical evidence and factory expertise on clothing, a criminal case is officially opened under the article on intentional murder. The case of Dave Rogers is back on the front pages with a wild, dangerous dynamic. Official investigation protocols record a sharp shift in the vectors of investigative action. The state police are looking for a circle of people who had access to the body or a motive for staging the discovery. During a video-recorded testimony gathering, Mary Hayes provides Detective Evans with important information, trying to facilitate the investigation. According to the protocol, Mary recalled a hidden detail. Exactly a year and a half before his fatal disappearance in 2017, Dave Rogers had a harsh, prolonged conflict with 2 professional climbers, John Burke and Mark Carroll. As stated in the case materials, the cause of the hostility was a serious violation of climbing ethics and large financial debts during a joint unsuccessful commercial ascent. This fact turns Burke and Carroll into the main suspects in the case. The investigation puts forward a version. The climbers took revenge on Dave, secretly detained him, and in 2022, they threw his body into the cave to divert suspicion from themselves. The operatives launch a tough power operation. Mark Carroll is detained in the city of Talkeetna. The arrest protocol records the movement of the subject to an isolated interrogation room, where a multi-hour, exhausting psychological pressure from the detectives begins. Within these walls, an extreme psychophysiological collapse of the suspect unfolds. As charges are brought against Carroll, he is suddenly overcome with numbness. His breathing is interrupted. He chokes from the pressure, unable to push a single word through his throat. A cold sweat breaks out on the man's forehead. His fingers begin to shake with a large, uncontrolled tremor, and the sensors record pulse fluctuations from 100 to 180 beats. The gaze freezes with panic. However, Carol's defense lays out concrete evidence on the table. The lawyers provide log files from international satellite trackers. According to the documents, Burke and Carol have been under 24-hour satellite surveillance for the past 5 years as part of expeditions in the Himalayas and the Andes, confirmed by customs stamps. They physically could not have held Dave's body. The police are forced to sign a report on their release. Realizing that they were almost put behind bars for a fabricated charge, Carol and Burke launch their own private investigation. They are driven by rage and professional instinct. Through their own channels in the judiciary, they obtain a copy of the original autopsy report of Dave's body. Each page of the document is studied under a microscope. The men are particularly drawn to the description of the damage to the deceased's left leg. The forensic expert clearly stated in the report, the tibia bones were literally crushed into pieces by a powerful mechanical impact, which, in its characteristics and depth of penetration of steel teeth, perfectly matches a heavy iron bear trap, an industrial-type trap. This technical record causes complete mental numbness in the climbers. A bear trap on the steep rocks of the Mount Dickey Massif. It sounds like an absolute impossible absurdity. Wild bears almost never enter that high-altitude sector due to the lack of a food base. Moreover, it is unprofitable for poachers to set heavy iron traps on vertical granite walls. Even if we imagine that the beast gets there, it is practically impossible and wildly expensive to lower its carcass down the sheer cliffs. A heavy bear trap weighing dozens of kilograms, no one would have pulled on their shoulders to such a height. Carol and Burke catch their breath from the terrible realization. Someone deliberately brought the bear trap to where it should never have been in natural conditions, or this terrible trauma of Dave Rogers did not occur in the Alaskan mountains at all. The private investigation of Mark Carroll and John Burke is moving to a new level. The logic of the mountaineers completely destroys the official version of the accident. The men are triggered by the fact of the presence of a bear trap in the medical report of the autopsy. According to their notes, a heavy iron trap on the steep rocks of the Mount Ortorton Massif is an absolute anomaly. Wild bears almost never climb to such heights due to the lack of a food base. Poachers setting traps there is absolutely unprofitable. Even if you imagine an animal getting caught, lowering its massive carcass down the sheer granite walls is practically impossible and wildly expensive. Someone deliberately brought this trap to where it was never supposed to be, or Dave got his leg bones crushed not in the Alaskan mountains. The shadow of suspicion of the climbers immediately falls on Mary Hayes. Men dissect her documented behavior in 2017, revealing wild discrepancies. The first red flag is a pause before the missing persons report. Dave was known for being meticulous about safety and had a hard rule of checking in via satellite every 5 days. However, as evidenced by the primary survey protocol materials, Mary didn't report the emergency to his parents until the 10th day from his departure. She calmly endured 5 whole days after the missed communication session, allowing the time window for rescue to close and the tracks in the mountains to completely disappear under fresh snow. The second suspicious fact is her behavior at the funeral in 2022. Relatives mentioned in the reports that the girl cried by the coffin, but these emotions seemed fake, as if she was hard to squeeze out tears. This performance looked especially strange against the backdrop of the fact that just a month after the official cessation of large-scale search operations in 2017, Mary calmly started a completely different relationship, completely erasing Dave from her life. Understanding that the investigation had reached a dead end, Carol and Burke decided to go all in. Closer to nightfall, they stake out as Mary leaves her private residence on the outskirts of Anchorage and make an unlawful entry onto her property. The climbers' wild risk-taking takes their breath away, acute shortness of breath ensues, and cold sweat breaks out on their foreheads. The men's fingers are seized by a fine, uncontrollable tremble as John Burke uses a tool to pick the lock on the back door of the house. They silently make their way into the dark corridor, and with their flashlights on, they make their way down into the deep basement. The atmosphere downstairs is saturated with pure fear. The basement is in a state of complete numbness. The rays of light cut through the darkness and grab in the far corner a giant industrial freezer of the Polar Chill brand. The device is completely disconnected from the electrical network, but inside the chamber there is still a strong chemical preservative and a pronounced putrid smell of human decay. Mark Carroll's heart rate instantly jumps to a critical 180 beats per minute. His throat constricts with a heavy spasm of acute horror. Mark takes a step forward and frantically throws off the heavy top cover of the freezer. When the beam of the lantern falls on the inner walls of the device, the men freeze under the weight of mute shock. Their gaze becomes absolutely glassy. The entire internal aluminum lining of the white chamber walls is covered with deep, chaotic scratches left by sharp metal climbing claws. Dave Rogers wasn't just lying here. He had been inside this iron coffin for a long time, alive, paralyzed, and in his death agony, desperately trying to kick the heavy lid with his feet, tearing the metal with climbing gear. The atmosphere in the deep basement of a private house heats up to a critical point. A second transition to a phase of maximum, uncontrolled risk. From the side of the driveway, a sharp, crunchy rustle of gravel is heard under the wheels of the car. The light of the powerful headlights instantly cuts through the narrow basement windows, roughly cutting through the darkness. Mary Hayes unexpectedly returned home much earlier, completely cutting off Mark Carroll and John Burke's usual exit route. The climbers instantly find themselves in a closed trap. An extreme psychophysiological collapse of the subjects is turned on. From the sharp panic and understanding of complete helplessness in Carroll and Burke, physical numbness sets in. The men's breathing is completely interrupted by severe shortness of breath. They literally begin to suffocate, unable to push even the smallest sound through their throat. Carroll's heart rate instantly jumps to the extreme limit, over 180 beats per minute. The throat is pressed by a cruel spasm of wild horror. Sweat breaks out on the climbers' foreheads, and their fingers shake with a great uncontrollable tremble. Burke's gaze becomes absolutely glassy, focusing on the basement door. Upstairs, the car door slams shut with a loud rumble, and heavy footsteps are already echoing in the first-floor corridor. They have only a few seconds before the girl comes downstairs. John Burke acts on pure adrenaline. He lunges to an old wooden shelving unit next to a switched-off Polar Chill industrial freezer. As Burke later clearly documented in the record of a private investigation, he ripped out with a crack the enchanted plastic box of building junk that Mary had forgotten to clean out during the hasty body removal. The container tips over onto the cold floor. Old papers, dry chemicals, and crushed, compacted trash fly into the darkness. At the very bottom of this dirty container, Carroll notices irrefutable evidence. He grabs a crumpled fiscal receipt from Summit Outfitters, officially dated August 2022 year. This document detailed the purchase of a full set of branded extreme gear, including a membrane jacket and lettuce green trekking sneakers, a complete 100% analog of the things that the frozen 5-year-old body of Dave Rogers was dressed in. The payment for the goods was cash, but the killer made a fatal mistake. To the check, a detachable coupon for a personal discount was automatically stapled with a steel clip, clearly made out to Mary Hayes' discount card. The dynamics of the race to death reaches its peak. Carroll clenches the fiscal check in his fist. The climbers hastily begin to fly out through the narrow basement window, straight into the darkness. Men in blood tear the skin on their hands on sharp metal edges of the frame, completely ignoring the pain, and heavily fall into thick bushes in the backyard. This happens exactly 1 second before the bright electric light turns on with a sharp click in the basement room. Already in the car, suffocating from an adrenaline collapse, Burke and Carol examine the obtained cure. The girl personally bought new clothes for the corpse 5 years after his official disappearance to stage an accident under the glacier. The crazy evidence immediately flies to Detective Evans' table. The policeman's breath is instantly caught from the scale of cynicism, and the pulse jumps to the limits. Based on the fiscal receipt with the confirmed discount card of Mary Hayes, the state prosecutor's office urgently issues an official arrest warrant. An armed tactical police unit conducts a swift surprise raid on the house. Mary Hayes is taken away in steel handcuffs under escort to the central interrogation room at the Anchorage police station. The investigation officially enters its final, uncompromising phase of psychological confrontation. Mary Hayes is being held in solitary confinement in a temporary holding cell, shackled in steel handcuffs. Official protocols of investigative actions record the strict pathological silence of the detainee. The girl refuses to answer questions, sits motionless, and her gaze remains absolutely glassy. Lead Detective Evans understands that the fiscal check is a powerful indirect evidence, but a direct link to the cause of Dave Rogers' death is needed for a court indictment. Standard soft tissue tests during the initial autopsy did not detect foreign substances because the biomaterial had frozen and most chemicals break down quickly. Evans makes the decision to expand the scope of the investigation. He formally orders a unique toxicological analysis of the internal structure of the preserved bone marrow of the deceased climber. The Anchorage Crime Lab conducts a deep scan of the dense structure of Dave's femur. The analysis results, which are urgently sewn to the case, cause a shock in the investigative group. A critical concentration of tyletamine, a heavy veterinary anesthetic of rapid action used for complete paralysis of large animals, was detected in the bone marrow. The chemical is completely eliminated from the blood within hours of death, making it invisible to routine tests, but the dense bone tissue reliably preserved the poison for all 5 years. The investigation reaches a difficult psychological impasse. Detectives clearly understand that Dave Rogers was poisoned and paralyzed before death. However, the exact step-by-step algorithm of this crime remains a mystery. How did a paralyzed person get a massive fracture from a bear trap? Why was there absolutely new clothes on the body? Most importantly, how did the frozen 5-year-old body end up in a remote cave in the Alaska mountains only in 2022? Mary Hayes' lawyers begin an aggressive legal offensive. According to the protocols, the defense officially demands the immediate closure of the case due to the complete lack of direct evidence of her personal presence in the mountains in 2022. The check only proves the fact of purchasing the items, but not the process of moving the body under the glacier itself. Evans decides to break the defense of the detainee uncompromisingly. He summons Mary Hayes for a repeated, tough interrogation. The detective consistently lays out before her photographs from the examination of the basement, enlarged shots of the inner walls of the switched-off polar chill freezer, where deep, chaotic scratches from Dave's metal climbing claws were recorded, as well as a conclusion about veterinary poison. At this moment, an extreme psychophysiological collapse of Mary unfolds in the interrogation room. From the wild pressure of evidence, her face is distorted by a wild panic spasm. Breathing becomes intermittent, turning into acute shortness of breath, and her throat is constricted by a heavy spasm. Cold, sticky sweat instantly covers her forehead. Her hands begin to beat with a fine, uncontrolled tremor, and her heart rate jumps to critical limits. Her glassy gaze is fixed on the photographs of the torn metal of the refrigerator. Evans notes in the report that he pins the girl in a corner of psychological breakdown, forcing her to realize the complete inevitability of punishment. The tension in the room reaches an absolute maximum. The interrogation room of the Anchorage Police Department. Video cameras record the final phase of psychological confrontation. Detective Evans lays out on the steel table in front of the detained Mary Hayes a package of evidence. Photographs of the interior lining of the turned-off Polar Chill freezer with deep, chaotic scratches. The results of the bone marrow toxicology with teletamine recorded. And the original fiscal receipt from Summit Outfitters for August 2022 with the coupon from her discount card. Under this legal pressure, Mary Hayes suffers a psychophysiological breakdown. The girl's face is distorted by a wild panic spasm. The jaw muscles completely petrify, and breathing becomes intermittent, turning into acute shortness of breath. Her gaze becomes completely glassy, rigidly focusing on the shots of torn metal. A cruel spasm occurs in Mary's throat, blocking the swallowing of air. Cold, sticky sweat covers her forehead in large drops. The fingers of her shackled hands begin to shake with a large, uncontrolled tremor, and her heart rate jumps to 180 beats per minute. The girl makes several heavy jerks with her chest and begins to speak in an even, icy tone. The interrogation transcript records a step-by-step reconstruction of the crime. According to the audio recording of the confession, Mary Hayes revealed the chronology of events in 2017. The motive was destructive jealousy due to Dave Rogers' secret communication with his girlfriend, Jessica. Mary decided to completely take the guy for herself. On the day of the imaginary solo hike, she poured a massive dose of veterinary anesthetic teletamine into his morning thermos with coffee. The drug paralyzed Dave instantly in the basement of the house. The mountaineer fell onto the concrete, but remained in clear consciousness, physically feeling every subsequent action of the killer. While the guy was helpless, Mary put his left leg between the steel teeth of a bear trap, which she had secretly stolen from the forestry warehouse 2 days earlier. She released the spring, mechanically crushing the shin bones into pieces so that the future investigation would write off the injury as an accident in the mountains. Understanding that the clothes would retain traces of the trap, Mary undressed Dave and burned all his equipment in the house furnace. She then dragged the live, paralyzed man into a Polar Chill industrial freezer, locked the lid, and turned off the heating in the basement. Dave Rogers was dying from shock and hypothermia directly in the iron box. When the paralyzing agent began to wear off, the mountaineer in agony tried to pry off the top lid, leaving deep scratches with the metal climbing crampons that Mary had forgotten to remove from his legs. After the murder, the girl deliberately waited for a 10-day pause before informing Dave's parents of his disappearance, so that the real tracks in the mountains would be completely snowed in. The mountaineer's body remained in the freezer for 4.5 years. The protocol recorded her words that she regularly went down, opened the device cover, combed Dave's hair, talked to the body, and annually celebrated the anniversaries of their relationship alone. In August 2022, due to accumulated debts, Mary was forced to urgently put the house up for sale. It was impossible to leave the corpse in the basement. She then developed a plan to dispose of the evidence by staging an accident. The girl went to the Summit Outfitters store and purchased a new set of assault gear for cash, making a mistake with the release dates of the 2022 models. She dressed the technological items on a completely frozen corpse, loaded the body into her pickup truck at night, took it to the Mount Dickey Massif, and on cargo sleds pulled it deep into an empty cave near the Ruth Glacier, imitating death from freezing 5 years ago. The final interrogation brought the investigative group complete horror. Smiling directly into the camera lens, Mary Hayes revealed the secret of Jessica's disappearance in a cold tone, who disappeared in the same week of 2017. The girl confessed that she had ambushed her rival, neutralized her with teletamine, tied her up with plastic ties, and at night took her to the construction site of the automobile bridge across the Susitna River. Mary cold-bloodedly dropped the paralyzed but alive Jessica to the very bottom of a deep technological formwork of the support structure, just a few minutes before the concrete mixers began pouring tons of liquid concrete there. The massive monolithic bridge, for 5 years, reliably hid in its third concrete support a terrible secret of murder. Based on the transcript of the confession, the court sentences Mary Hayes to the maximum penalty of life imprisonment without the possibility of appeal or parole. The criminal case is closed.